Sentwana yami lengoma iyangihlanisa.
Iyogcwala inja namhlanje kofika.
Kuyafuneka. Kuba ngempela ke namhlanje. Njani manje?
Yogcwala umsunanini, yogcwala inja.
Amarondo.
The night of August 30th, 2017. The streets of Umlazi, KwaZulu-Natal, are creepily quiet, until the silence is shattered by the crack of gunfire. Tires scream in the distance. Sirens howl. A man lies bleeding beside a luxury car, a figure both feared and revered. His name? Sandile, Chillies Bhengu. To the police, he was a ruthless criminal. To some locals, he was a township legend. But to South Africa, he had become a symbol of the deadly game between crime and survival. Umlazi, KwaZulu-Natal, a township carved by struggle, built on the edge of opportunity, and haunted by inequality. Life here is raw, real, and unforgiving. For many, survival isn't about living, it's about outsmarting the next hit, the next rival, or the next day. Born in this maze of concrete and corrugated metal, Sandile Bhengu came of age not in classrooms, but in back alleys and shebeens. As a child, he watched men idolized for what they took, not what they earned. Hijackers drove flashy cars through dirt roads. Drug dealers threw parties when the rest of the township starved. These were the role models. These were the kings of the streets. He earned the nickname, Chillies, during his teens. Some say it came from his sharp temper, others from the speed with which he could vanish from a crime scene. But what's certain is this, even as a teenager, Chillies had a fire in him. He was fearless, calculating, and smart. His first brush with the law reportedly came in his late teens, over a stolen vehicle. But nothing stuck. Police suspected he had inside help, either that or witnesses knew better than to speak out. By his early 20s, he was no longer running with gangs, he was leading them. Under his command, vehicle hijackings became surgical operations. He built a reputation not just for violence, but for precision. Some called him a phantom. He could disappear into the township seconds after a job, blending in like smoke in the night. While many youth were crushed under the weight of poverty, Chillies rose above it, not through school, but through the streets. In a land where education failed and jobs were scarce, he turned to what Umlazi offered, the underworld. But his rise wasn't just about crime, it was about command. He earned loyalty. Younger gangsters saw him as a teacher. Older ones respected him as a boss. When Chillies spoke, others listened. And when he ordered, people obeyed, or they vanished. Despite repeated arrests, his syndicate grew. His reach extended beyond Umlazi, into Durban, Pinetown, even Pietermaritzburg. Authorities were convinced that he had established links with larger car smuggling operations, even possibly exporting stolen vehicles through Mozambique or Lesotho routes. But back home, some saw a different man. Locals said he shared food parcels, paid school fees for struggling families, and gave money to churches and burial societies. He was part gangster, part myth, a paradox the state couldn't decode. To law enforcement, Chillies was a menace. To the streets of Umlazi, he was a necessary evil, or even a misunderstood hero. And so, the legend began. He was more than just a street-level criminal. By 2015, Sandile, Chillies Bhengu was no longer hustling for survival, he was operating a full-blown criminal enterprise. At the top of Durban Metro Police's most wanted list, his name was whispered in meetings of elite police task forces. And in the underworld, it was spoken with awe, or fear. Investigators believed Chillies had masterminded over 40 confirmed hijackings. But that was only what they could prove. Insiders suspected his syndicate had stolen millions of rands worth of high-end vehicles, moving them through chop shops, re-registration fraud, and even international smuggling routes. SUVs, BMWs, and bakkies would disappear in seconds, never to be seen again. He didn't work alone, but no one in his crew ever betrayed him. That kind of silence doesn't come from loyalty, it comes from power. He was known for rewarding those who served him, and destroying those who dared cross him. Police surveillance efforts were constantly compromised. Every time they got close, Chillies was gone, sometimes minutes before a raid. It became clear, he had informants. Maybe in the streets. Maybe in the system. No one could be trusted. Durban's car theft unit started treating Bhengu's name like a ghost in the files, a phantom. Always there. Always involved. But never caught red-handed. He moved with military precision. His team carried AK-47s, handguns, radios, they operated like a militia. Some officers said confronting his crew felt like facing insurgents, not criminals. Police feared him. His enemies disappeared. And to some youths, he became a twisted kind of role model. But behind the myth, the evidence was stacking up. Victims spoke out, hijacked at gunpoint, some beaten, others lucky to be alive. Surveillance footage, eyewitness reports, cell phone tower pings, it was building a picture. A clear picture. Chillies wasn't just a player, he was the mastermind. In late 2016, a confidential informant gave police the tip they'd been waiting for. Chillies had become sloppy. He was personally removing tracking devices from hijacked vehicles, a job he once left to his foot soldiers. He was showing up more publicly. Acting more boldly. Whether it was overconfidence or a sense of invincibility, it didn't matter. Law enforcement smelled blood. A multi-agency tactical unit was quietly formed. SAPS. Metro Police. The Hawks. Their mission, one shot, one takedown. End Chillies' reign, permanently. It was the evening of August 30th, 2017, and the streets of Umlazi were unusually quiet in one section, B section. Parked on the roadside was a white Mercedes-Benz, recently reported stolen. Inside sat Chillies and two of his top lieutenants. According to intelligence, they were busy disabling the vehicle's tracking device. Unbeknownst to them, they were surrounded. A specialized unit of SAPs and Metro police officers, armed and in plain clothes, had them in a tight perimeter. It was a tactical takedown, not a raid. No sirens. No announcements. Just action. What happened next remains disputed. According to the police, they approached the car and identified themselves. Chillies allegedly reached for a firearm, and a gunfight broke out. Officers returned fire. In the chaos, Chillies was shot and killed. However, several eyewitnesses told a different story. They claimed there was no shootout. That the car was ambushed. That Chillies was gunned down before he even had a chance to respond. Within minutes, the area was sealed off. Images began circulating online, the white car, bullet holes through the doors, and a body on the ground, lifeless, bloody, still gripping a gun. His death sent shockwaves across KwaZulu-Natal. The king of Umlazi was gone. To the authorities, it was a victory. To his enemies, it was a relief. But to his followers, and those who benefited from his generosity, it was the end of an era. With the body of Sandile, Chillies Bhengu lying cold in the government mortuary, the reality of his absence began to sink into Umlazi like a slow poison. For the South African Police Service, SAPS, this was a milestone. One of KwaZulu-Natal's most wanted men had been permanently removed. Official statements highlighted Chillies' long list of alleged crimes: vehicle hijackings, armed robbery, attempted murder, obstruction of justice. He was painted as a man who terrorized the province with impunity. Officers praised the operation as a surgical success and hinted that more arrests would follow in connection to his syndicate. But beyond the police briefings and press headlines, a different narrative emerged in the backstreets of Umlazi. Many didn't believe Chillies died in a gunfight. Some insisted there was no exchange of fire, that police simply opened fire and eliminated a man they couldn't control. Whether true or not, the perception spread like wildfire. In townships where trust in law enforcement is already fragile, it only took one rumor to spark a collective belief. Some residents recalled that Chillies had made mistakes, but said he had also fed the hungry, paid for school fees, and protected families when the police looked away. His acts of street generosity, funding funerals, providing bail money, supporting single mothers, had made him a complex figure. A criminal to the system, but a benefactor to the forgotten. His funeral turned into a spectacle of defiance. Held under tight security, the event drew hundreds. Convoys of vehicles.
Police in Durban say they have foiled plans by criminals to destabilize communities in Umlazi Township and surrounding areas. 5 suspects were arrested shortly before and after today's funeral of notorious gang leader Sandile Bhengu.
The streets of Umlazi, a hive of activity. Thousands came to witness the funeral of Sandile Bhengu. The gang leader was shot dead by police last week after he was allegedly found with a stolen car. Police numbers were strengthened at today's funeral in response to threats of crime by the gang members ahead of the funeral. 3 suspects were arrested at a night vigil last night after several cars were torched.
In the funeral, there were 2 suspects that were arrested, and one of them is working for a very big company, BMW company, and he was wearing RTI uniform, and the other one was wearing a uniform for Navy.
Bele says the police will remain in the township to ensure that law and order is maintained. Cassandra Zungu.
Some suspected to be stolen, paraded through Umlazi. Attendees wore t-shirts with his face, printed in bold under the words, "Gone but not forgotten." Red bandanas tied around arms and necks signified loyalty to his gang, while others carried placards reading, "You can't kill the struggle." Despite warnings, there were no incidents at the burial. But the atmosphere was tense, layered with a sense of unfinished business. Soon after his death, the criminal underworld began to fracture. Gangs once unified under Chillies' leadership split into rival factions. Turf wars erupted in the south of Durban. Hijackings didn't stop, they escalated. Now, there was no central figure mediating conflicts. Street bosses fought openly for dominance, with young, reckless lieutenants rising up to prove themselves. In the weeks that followed, Umlazi saw a sharp spike in shootings. Police linked the violence to internal power struggles. Former allies of Chillies were either fleeing, killed, or forming their own breakaway syndicates. Within 3 months, law enforcement recorded over 20 gang-related shootings, many believed to be connected to the vacuum left by Chillies' death.
8 people have been shot dead at an informal settlement just south of Durban in the area of Umlazi. It's understood a group of 6 men and 2 women were drinking together at a tavern when they were attacked and murdered. The events leading up to the shooting are unknown at this stage, but police say they are continuing to investigate.
But the aftershock wasn't just criminal. It was cultural. To many young people in Umlazi, Chillies' name took on legendary status. Graffiti in his honor appeared across railway bridges and school walls. Some taxi drivers refused to remove Chillies' stickers from their windows. He became a symbol, not just of defiance, but of a generation that never found a place in South Africa's promises of freedom and reform. This idolization of Chillies sparked concern among local leaders. Pastors, teachers, and community activists warned that his glorification was rewriting the truth, turning a violent figure into a misunderstood hero. They pleaded for youth to see beyond the myth, to build their futures through education and honest work. But their voices were often drowned out by a louder, more compelling narrative, that Chillies had beaten the system, lived on his own terms, and died fighting. To many, that was enough. In time, new names would surface in the criminal scene, younger, more volatile, and less disciplined than Chillies. But none could replicate his control, his mystique, or the cold efficiency of the empire he built. Even in death, Sandile, Chillies Bhengu continued to cast a long, cold shadow over Umlazi and the surrounding townships. What he left behind was not just a broken syndicate or a fractured gang. He left behind a legacy of fear, one woven into the very fabric of street culture, gang hierarchy, and community memory. It was the kind of fear that didn't disappear with a funeral. It lingered. It reshaped behavior. It became lawless order. The vacuum Chillies left was immediate. His lieutenants, once fiercely loyal, splintered within days. Without his iron control, younger, power-hungry subordinates began staking claims to territory and influence. But unlike Chillies, they lacked structure. Discipline gave way to chaos. Hijackings turned more violent. Mistakes increased. Innocent bystanders became victims of reckless revenge hits. Umlazi had traded one tyrant for a dozen unpredictable ones. Law enforcement tried to capitalize on the fallout. A wave of arrests followed in the months after Chillies' death. Police raided safe houses, impounded cars, and rounded up several of his former allies. But while the takedowns were publicized, none carried the same impact as Bhengu's fall. None filled the psychological gap. His ghost still ruled the township. And the fear wasn't only among the criminals. It had spread to witnesses, informants, even local police. A handful of people who had publicly spoken against Chillies during his life, or even after his death, were quietly targeted. A local shop owner who once testified in a hijacking case was gunned down outside his store. An ex-gang member was found stabbed behind a schoolyard fence. No suspects were ever arrested. The message was clear: Chillies' enemies were not safe, even after his death. In schools, his name became code for status. Young boys with ambitions of becoming gangsters wore his colors and mimicked his mannerisms. Chillies mode became slang for going all in. Reckless, fearless, and without apology. The police feared that he had transcended the criminal world and entered the realm of iconography. Social media added fuel to the fire. Fan pages appeared on Facebook and TikTok, glorifying his lifestyle. They shared clips of luxury cars he allegedly drove, screenshots of newspaper headlines, and quotes falsely attributed to him. In one viral post, an image of Chillies was captioned, "They feared me because I became what they created." The narrative was spreading faster than any official countermessage. The man once declared South Africa's most wanted had become a folk anti-hero, a symbol of survival, rebellion, and power in the face of a system that millions believed had failed them. Community leaders, clergy, and social workers warned of a growing crisis. Young men weren't being deterred by Chillies' death, they were being inspired by his life. A new generation, already hardened by poverty and social exclusion, saw in Chillies a blueprint, violent, yes, but effective. Yet beneath all the glamour and fear, there was another legacy, one less visible, but more enduring. The families left behind. The victims whose cars were stolen, whose relatives were injured or killed. The shopkeepers who lived under threat. The children who lost fathers to prison because of Bhengu's syndicate. For them, his name didn't echo with admiration. It echoed with loss. And in their homes, no murals hung. Only grief. Years after his death, his story remains unfinished. Not because new facts are emerging, but because South Africa, and particularly townships like Umlazi, have yet to address the conditions that gave birth to men like Sandile Chillies Bhengu. Until they do, his legacy, built on power, fear, and fractured hope, will not rest in peace. He was buried in a quiet cemetery under the grey KwaZulu-Natal sky, his coffin lowered into the soil as chants and gunshots rang out in the distance. But Sandile, Chillies Bhengu didn't stay buried, not in the streets, not in the mines, and not in the nightmares of those who once feared or followed him. In Umlazi, his name is still whispered in alleyways, painted on walls, and embedded in the codes of gangs that rose from his ashes. His empire may have crumbled, but his blueprint survives, not in the form of leadership, but in chaos. A ghost with no face, no rules, and no conscience. Police files may have closed on Bhengu, but for the victims, the violence he unleashed lives on. The mothers who never recovered stolen sons. The fathers whose cars were taken at gunpoint. The children now orphaned by bullets meant for others. For them, the name Chillies doesn't inspire, it terrifies. In the end, Sandile Chillies Bhengu was not a myth. He was real. He walked these streets. He bled on the concrete. He built an empire of steel, silence, and stolen dreams. And when he fell, he left behind something far more dangerous than a gang. He left behind a legacy. One that still haunts the streets of Umlazi. One that still refuses to die. One that still asks the question: what happens when a criminal becomes a king, and the people crown him willingly? This was not just the story of a gangster. This was the story of a system that created him. And now struggles to erase him. If this story opened your eyes to the blurred lines between crime, community, and justice, don't stay silent. Subscribe for more real South African crime documentaries. Like, comment your thoughts, and share with someone who needs to see the truth behind the headlines. Together, let's keep the stories alive, and the truth in the open.